Hello, Anna. Yes, functional neurological disorder, or FND as it's known, is something that affects a really close personal friend of mine. So I've been watching them go on their own medical journey over many years. It's made me more curious and interested. And in fact, this is a widespread issue to the point where so many patients living with functional neurological disorder are really hoping to see funding pledged in the federal budget next week to try to get more public specialised clinics offering treatment services in every state and territory, including here in Canberra. Now, some people will be thinking, what is FND? Never heard of it? Well, let's hear from Dr. Catherine Gill, who is a medical expert herself, a medical researcher and occupational therapist. She's been living with it for at least a decade, and she channeled those experiences into creating a support service for other people living with FND. It's called FND Australia Support Services, and it's staffed, this charity, by a handful of patient volunteers that make it all operate. Let's hear from Dr. Gill.
Like a lot of people, I had a difficult challenge with FND, especially initially trying to get a diagnosis, eventually finding the diagnosis written in my medical notes a number of years later. So for a number of years, I didn't have a diagnosis. At one point, we thought I'd had a stroke. And when I did find out a label for my condition, I had no clue what this condition was. And then had to begin my own research because at that time there was very little known about FND. So I came down with FND around 2013. And I found there was nowhere to go, and I sort of went through the scientific literature in university libraries and was getting quite confused between, what neurology was saying, what psychiatry was saying, trying to make sense of this condition. And it was really through my own lived experience, trying to make sense of what I was dealing with, that I founded the organisation FND Australia Support Services a couple of years later. And through this service, we're just growing exponentially. The more I do, sort of like the more need we see there is. We now have over 3,500 people in our support group. It is actually quite common. So it's the second most reason for a neurological consult after headache. So it's poorly understood across society, across the community, across health services, but it is a reasonably common condition. We're getting, around 15 inquiries a day with new people saying, I've just been diagnosed with this condition. We've got an FND app that's out there that's free to download, and that has a lot of information about FND. It has various management plans, etc. And we've just recently been funded by the New South Wales Ministry of Health to run a 12-week group program. So that'll help people to understand the condition. But we urgently need treatment services, and they are the specialised treatment services that are holistic, that can address the neurological, the physical implications, the disability problems, if there's any sort of underlying mental health issues. We need to treat people holistically within a multidisciplinary team. Those services are just not out there and they're not funded.
And that is Dr. Catherine Gill, who is a patient living with FND, or functional neurological disorder, and she's also the founder and president of a charity called FND Australia Support Services, which relies on the role of patients to voluntarily man a call line and also man a Facebook site that is very popular with people living with FND. Anna Vito, in particular, one of those people that manages the Facebook site that is hugely popular with people trying to get to grips with this condition that is so poorly understood, is an incredible young woman from the far south coast of New South Wales. Her name is Nell Allen Coe. She is 26 now. She was diagnosed with FND at 18, and she regularly travels to Canberra and Sydney for treatment from her home at Nethercote near Eden on the far south coast of New South Wales. And she really spoke to me, Anna, about feeling belittled, ignored, dismissed, abandoned, treated with discrimination. These are all common experiences for patients living with FND in medical settings. So let's hear a little bit more from Nell Allen Coe, this incredible 26-year-old visiting Canberra for treatment, about some of her experiences.
The only negative with living on the far south coast is that it is a long way to cities for treatment, whether that be a management style or any intervention type treatments. So I regularly travel up here to Canberra for my pain psychologist, who I've been seeing for about 10 years. So it's about a 3.5 hour drive for us, sometimes a little bit longer if I'm in a lot of pain. We have to stop regularly to make it manageable, and then travelling to either Canberra or Sydney to see neurologists. Basically, the simplest and easiest way to explain FND, and the explanation that many people are given early on, is that it's not a hardware problem in our brain, it's a software problem. So basically, thinking of a computer, the hardware is all of the hardware is correct. There is no breaks in leads or anything like that, but the software is glitching. So the messages in our brain are not sending and receiving correctly. So whether that be a message to a limb so that you can walk, because a mobility changes is another often frequent symptom, or whether it be a message to your body to be able to swallow properly with food or chew, those sorts of things where the message just doesn't send. We don't yet understand why. There is research happening across the world. I think the UK is one of the leading areas in that, and we are lucky to have Dr. Alex Len, who is focused on research and finding ways to move forward and management techniques for people with FND. I don't think I have come across one person who has FND who hasn't had a challenge with medical professionals, the general public, family and friends, that don't think we're making it up. We aren't. There is no way that someone would make up a symptom that is that exhausting, that fatiguing, and that life-changing. And it can happen to anyone, is the huge thing. This is not something that is a super rare 1 in a million situation. It's such an impact. It's the same as someone who has MS or Parkinson's. I mean, a lot of our symptoms will often be mistaken for those conditions in the very beginning stages, until MRIs or different things have been done to rule that out. So it's key, and I think particularly around the issue of accessing NDIS, we have a lot of challenges with accessing NDIS. I know that there's been a huge number of people in our peer support groups who have been unable to access it. They've received rejection after rejection. And so if any politicians are contacted or they see anyone in their communities that are having those challenges, reach out, offer your support, please. It's so important. It has been of help to some people on our support groups who have reached out to MPs, and they have, with their supporting letters and other assistance, been able to gain access to services like NDIS or other challenges around accessibility of their homes or different situations. But yeah, any support we can receive, any funding. FND Australia Support Services does have an FND clinic where they offer online telehealth OT services and counselling services, but funding that is very difficult. We do our best to offer it, from my understanding, with just a small contribution, which is significantly reduced compared to if you were accessing these services privately. But it's still quite difficult, and we would like to be able to expand services from what I've heard from people who are running FND Oz, but we can't do so without the funding support.
Sounds like a pretty frustrating situation for a lot of people. An incredibly frustrating situation. You're just listening there to Nell Allen Cohen, a 26-year-old living with FND, or functional neurological disorder. And yes, she's among the many patients and specialists that would really like to see in the federal budget funding for public specialised clinics in every state and territory. We don't have one here in Canberra, and so patients do have to travel to Sydney and other places. As part of the TV story that we're going to see tonight at 7 p.m, we're also going to meet a Canberra family, the White family from the north of Canberra, with Mel White in particular, whose life really turned around about 2 years ago when she was rushed to emergency. She'd already been living with epilepsy for decades before this suspected stroke, but after an MRI, it revealed she had a brain aneurysm and a brain tumour, and then eventually also functional neurological disorder, or FND. So what a cluster of medical conditions. But Mel has worked tirelessly to assemble a specialist medical team here in Canberra and beyond, and she's worked very hard every day to regain some of her independence and freedom. We'll see her doing some of the training that she's doing to retrain her brain. Part of that is distraction, to try and regain some of that freedom and independence. And she's very aware of her privileged position here in the national capital, and is also one of the voices backing calls for more public specialised FND clinics to offer better services for the increasing number of people, particularly girls and women and young people and children, who are being diagnosed with FND, functional neurological disorder.
We'll tune in for 7 o'clock news tonight to see more. Thank you very much, Adi.
A pleasure.
That's Adrienne Francis with us on ABC Radio Canberra this afternoon.